Now consciousness has become a very important subject of study in physics. In the old days, the physicists used to say, oh, consciousness, that's something, chemistry and all that. But now there are many articles saying consciousness, yes, we can understand the basic principles of the brain, but not how the subjective attitudes of the mind. In recent years, especially after the 60th birthday of Dalai Lama in this very hotel, they gave me a subject to analyze, like convergence and divergence between science and spirituality or religion, whichever you call it. And that of course brings you back to Buddhism and Shankara, because Shankara was the opposite of the Buddhist philosophy. And both of them talk a lot about consciousness, mind, while the Buddha rejects divinity and things like that. The logic developed by the Buddhists is fantastic. It's very close to science in many ways.
You mentioned sort of the approach of Buddhism on consciousness. Could you elucidate on that for us?
Well, the Buddha first of all says, well, don't bother me with questions like God. There is no such thing as a soul, but you must live a good life. But you have not a consciousness in the usual sense. You have a mind that has to be trained. Science itself is coming in some ways to the question of consciousness. So the Buddhist studies is halfway and most interesting if you study it from a scientific point of view. Then of course there is the later logicians like Nagarjuna, who talk of nothingness. It seems very strange, but when you read fundamental particles and study fundamental particles, that also comes out from vacuum states. So one can find parallels, but whether they are satisfactory to either side is a question of time, I think.
In what ways? You just mentioned that Buddhism was coming closer to science.
Well, science doesn't talk about divinity. It doesn't talk about the soul. Observation comes first. But at the same time, the Buddha says a good life, a proper life is essential, the Eightfold Path and all that. And causality is a very important aspect of Buddhism. Causality is a very important aspect of science also. Though nowadays you cannot recognize the cause, but it is there somewhere in some complicated form. So in this way it mixes very well. And that was our study in recent times, including some very fundamental aspects of physics, nuclear physics, which I study, and this philosophical aspects. It's welding beautifully in modern times. Maybe if you had asked me this question 50 years ago when I started doing research, I would have said, oh, leave alone all the spiritual business, everything is material, but I'm not so sure now.
How much of this you think is the tempering of age?
Age brings a certain degree of maturity, and at the same time you require a staff to hold on to. But it's not simply I whom you feel. You read, there's a new journal called Consciousness, started by the hard-headed physicists, because they can't explain it simply on chemical terms or neuron terms. There are many aspects of the brain which are strange.